My name is Darryl Frost. I'm the president and founder of Central City Brewers and Distillers. I'm here today of my own volition in support of Diane Watt's race for the leader of the Liberal Party.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is December 7th, 2017, and this is episode 65. Politicos is the number one BC podcast, yeah, I'm going to say it, that occasionally gets distracted by what's happening in Ottawa and elsewhere. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, where we're at PoliticosPod, and support the show at patreon.com/Politicos.
I'm Scott.
And I'm Ian. And this week, we're joined by
David Moscrop.
Welcome back to the show, David.
It's so nice to be back.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk about by-elections, John Horgan's first term, and everything else that's been happening this past week, because it seems to have been busy. We're not even going to talk about Mueller and indictments and Roy Moore and Al Franken. There's tons of U.S. politics for all of the shit that's going on down there, because we have lots here in Canada to talk about. But before we begin, we have to thank our premier sponsors, Lindsay Teds and Blake Hodson, for helping make this show possible. They're the ones who throw in $50 a month, which is incredible. I also want to give a note to everyone who does support us on Patreon. If you haven't seen yet, Patreon's implementing this new payment regime that's pretty controversial. And basically, they're going to pass the fees on to you, the supporters, instead of us eating them. So from our point of view, this is good, because instead of getting 85 to 90% of the funds that you're pledging us, we'll get 95% of them. Patreon still takes a 5% cut, but this means you're going to see a 2.9% increase plus 35 cents on each of the pledges you've made. Luckily, we're a once a month show, so that's only one pledge. There are other podcasts, things out there that you're going to have to pay that 35 cents each time. So if it's $1, it's suddenly like you're paying 40% more, which is why a lot of people are really upset, even though your credit card's only charged once. This makes no sense. A lot of creators are really pissed off, and it looks like Patreon's just trying to pocket a bunch of spare change. Anyway, more money for us, so we're happy. If this pisses you off, let us know, and we'll add our complaints to Patreon, I guess. Otherwise, you can... If you're really annoyed, you can go to PayPal and donate to us at paypal.me/Politicos. And if we really need to, we can set up an alternate monthly supporting system, or just throw a one-time donation at that PayPal link and consider buying us a beer for Christmas. So to begin, Section 1, by-election fever. There's a by-election in BC happening on Monday, and we've only briefly talked about it.
Yeah, we mentioned this when it was formally announced, but Surrey-White Rock has a vacancy because Diane Watts left federal politics to, well, what looks like run a vain attempt to be the leader of the BC Liberal Party.
Central City endorsed, or Central City Brewing's owner endorsed candidate. We're drinking Big Rock thanks to Dave, but
yeah,
that was a special video.
It's worth watching the video, if only to try to figure out for yourself whether or not he's being held hostage. It's one of the most awkward endorsements I've ever seen in my life. It starts with him staring into the camera and saying, "I'm here of my own volition." And one assumes that off camera, someone's got a pistol to his back. So it's look, it was weird and dumb and probably won't make a difference. So anyway, there you can look it up on the oldinternet.com.
So Surrey-White Rock has been a pretty solidly conservative riding, I guess, as long as it's been a riding, which is only 2011, maybe. I'm going to get that wrong.
Show notes.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. In 2011, it went conservative with 53% of the vote. In 2015, it went conservative with 44% of the vote, but the Liberals were right on the tail with 41.5%. And there's a suggestion, and Eric Grenier put this in his piece, that the polls have shifted enough that the Liberals have a chance to actually win this, because it's not that big of a difference. And by elections, it's all about turnout. And the Liberals, for their part, are running former popular White Rock Mayor Gordon Hogg, who is also a BC Liberal MLA, interestingly. So this is the fun of the BC Liberals. They can run for whoever they want.
Yeah, it's like tofu.
The favorite thing I found about Gordon Hogg was he had been nicknamed the broccoli minister at one point because he was
clearly not anymore
promoting healthy eating. But there was this weird jab at him from NDP hacks, and I found it kind of problematic that they were saying, oh, how should he promote healthy eating? He's obese, which
God.
that was 2009 or 2008, but still, Hogg's got a good shot. He's popular, has some profile, and has been pushing hard. Justin Trudeau's been in the riding a couple times. Andrew Scheer has also been there promoting their candidate, Kelly Lynn Findlay, who's the former MP for next door riding, Delta Richmond East. She was Harper's Parliamentary Secretary of Justice. Before that, the Associate Minister of Defense, and I think the Minister of National Revenue. She's a lawyer, fairly respected in conservative circles, maybe. So it's really down to those two. And then we have this host of other runs, including the NDP's Jonathan Silveira, who founded Surrey Kids Matter and has run for the BC NDP in the past. But no one's really banking on him. I'm not even sure Jagmeet's been to the riding. And have the NDP just written this off?
I think so. Just looking at the past results, the riding's just not there for them.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So the Liberals lost by something like you said, 2.5 points in 2015. The riding's changed a little bit, so it's perhaps less conservative than it used to be when it was different. They've got a pretty decent shot. They sent the Prime Minister there. They sent the Minister of Defense as well to stump. It looks like a coin toss at this point. By-elections often go poorly for the incumbent, so you'd expect that to be a problem. They often go poorly, obviously, for Liberals in ridings that tend to go conservative, but it seems like in this case it might be a close one, which, by-elections aren't that important unless the Parliament's really, really close. So in some sense, everyone's going to try to turn this into a story. No matter what happens, there's going to be a narrative. The Liberals are ascendant, everybody still loves us. Or the Conservatives are back and Andrew Scheer is going to lead us to a 300-seat majority in 2019. But the truth is it doesn't really matter that much. But it'll be an interesting race to watch because, in some sense, it does show that the Liberals aren't, universally unpopular, nor has Andrew Scheer given the Conservatives a sort of shot in the arm that some folks thought he might, some delusional folks thought he might.
Yeah, there are 3 other by-elections going on that are a lot less interesting, not just because they're not in BC. You have Bonavista, Burren, Trinity, which is probably the most unexciting race, where the Liberals won the last election there with 82% of the vote.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's not bad.
I think they can. I don't think they'll get that, but
One of the highest margins
Yeah.
in the last election.
Those end up being real tight races for the nomination because it's a really sweet job. Well, no, I mean, it's a tough job, but it's not such a bad job, right? Everybody wants it.
and similarly, you have Battlefords, Lloydminster, which
Can
is
I guess? Can I guess which one?
Yeah,
that
go for it.
Does that one go conservative?
Yeah, a little bit. 60-70%, I think. I didn't pull the number on that one. And then you have Scarborough, Agincourt. That one's still a pretty solidly Liberal riding. Yeah. I guess the other thing I'll bring up with the race here in Surrey, I guess, the Greens are running a Larry Calero, who I could find almost nothing about. And then there's 3 minor parties, and I always love to give a shout out to the minor parties. The Progressive Canadian Party is running Michael Hunefeld, who's a former progressive conservative activist. He's also been involved in the BC Liberals and the NPA, and he's a SFU and Columbia College business instructor, so he's just he's never been elected before, but he's worked on a few campaigns for center-right parties, and just feels like Canada needs a not Andrew Scheer conservative voice.
All right.
That's
Early
understandable.
He's a red Tory, is that the idea?
Yeah, I guess.
All right. It's nice to know that there's a few of them still kicking around.
On the other farther side is the Christian Heritage Party, who is running Rod Taylor, their leader, who's been their leader since 2014. Not a ton I could find about Mr. Taylor. I think he was born in the States, but he has been in BC since he was young. He worked on CN Rail and a bunch of other labor jobs. In 2000, though, he won the BC Interior Lumber Grading Championship, which is a thing.
All right.
Well,
So-
I mean, lumber grain is important, so
Yeah.
why not have a contest about it?
And finally, there's candidate for the Libertarian Party. So lots of parties running on the right in Surrey, I guess. Donald Wilson. Wilson's a family lawyer. I found his Facebook page, which is Useless Gov, where his slogan, he's put up a billboard or a sign outside his office where it's just less gov, G-O-V, period, more you, period.
Ooh.
He ran for the BC Libertarians in North Vancouver Lonsdale in 2017 in the provincial election and didn't win. But he's out there and giving it
Good for him.
giving it the Democratic try.
It's going to be tight. It's really a toss-up. Yeah, not much else to say.
Right. Well, we'll find out that on Monday. Any predictions that you want to put in podcast form before?
You know what? I'm going to say the incumbency factor leads to a slight conservative victory, but very narrow.
Yeah, agreed. 2-point conservative win.
Actually, both incumbency factors. They won last time, and they're fighting the incumbent party government.
Right. Yeah, right. The two ends of it. Yeah. I'm going to go 2-point conservative win.
I think Hogg's got the profile there. He might be able to take it, and he's not a far lefty on the Liberal scale if he's been in the BC Liberals. So just to split the difference. So one of us is right. I'll go with Hogg winning it by a narrow margin as well. The other surprise announcement this week was John Horgan announced the candidate for the Kelowna West by-election to replace Christy Clark, who stepped down in the summer after she didn't get to be premier anymore. The NDP are going to be running Shelley Cook, and John Horgan more interestingly announced that the by-election there will be sometime in the spring before the legislature is recalled. He didn't actually name the date, which seemed weird, but it'll be before the legislature is recalled in February. The Liberals are running Ben Stewart, who was actually the MLA for the riding from 2009 to 2013 when he stepped aside to let Christy Clark run somewhere after she lost here in Vancouver Point Grey, despite the Liberals winning that election overall. Stewart is the owner of Quailsgate Estate Winery, which he inherited from his father, who inherited a farm from his father. They've been in the Okanagan for a long time. And Stewart has also run for the Conservative Party of Canada nomination in Kelowna Lake Country in 2005, but he didn't win that. So he's got quite a bit of local profile. The BC NDP are running Shelley Cook, as I mentioned. She's the former executive director of the John Howard Society, a prison reform charity I have a lot of respect for. Cook ran against Clark in that by-election in 2017 and did not win, if you remember that. The Green Party is running engineer and someone who makes a lot of net zero houses in Kelowna called Robert Stupka.
Yeah, a very Green Party thing.
The, solar panel, no energy usage. He won a PEG BC 2012 Young Professional Award, Scott. You could try and achieve that still. I think you have to be under 35.
Yeah, I'll still got a shot. That's for, I guess, now EGBC awards for that, but...
And when you go to Stupka's Twitter, you can find that he created it in March 2016, but deleted every tweet before November 2017. Or he just didn't use Twitter for a year and a half.
It was probably a reasonably well thought out purging. I mean, we've seen a few candidates implode because of past social media, and honestly, it's probably something we're going to see a lot more of is candidates purging their accounts.
Yeah. And the public adjusting a little bit to what's acceptable. They're going to have to, otherwise in the next 10 years, there's going to be nobody who can run.
Oh, yeah. The Prime Minister of 2040 is going to be the most boring millennial of all time.
Or the most extreme, unbelievably unpalatable person we've ever had as Prime Minister. And it's going to go one way or the other.
It'll be a Scheer or a Trump.
It's going to be a Scheer or a Trump. Yeah,
that's
a good way to put it. A Stanfield or a Trump. How about that for a little
Deep
throwback?
Who we think's going to win this, but because it's Kelowna, it's the Liberals. That's just it.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah, the Liberals have almost never lost there, or at least a center-right party I don't think has ever lost in that region.
Yeah.
And so it'll be a 60-70% easy win, even though the NDP would love to have a little bit stronger of a margin.
They've got other things to worry about.
Well, moving on to segment 2. Is BC better yet? The first legislative session for the new government ended this week, and, well, it's led to a bunch of roundups in all the media outlets, and including us on, well, how they've done. So they've got a few big kind of accomplishments under their belt, or at least started on things. They brought in some much-needed campaign finance reform. They've kick-started an electoral referendum process, brought in lobbyist reform, changed some local election fundraising laws, as well as started a whole bunch of task force and consultations on everything from the electoral reform to marijuana to the MSP task force.
One thing, which is why we wanted to have you on the show, Dave, also because of just fun and beer and
I live down
drinks
the road.
Yeah, you live next door. I wanted to ask, the NDP has put forward all these consultations, all these task force. Do you think these are, and one of the things you talk about is deliberative democracy and making better decisions. Do you think these are a good step towards that, or are they more of a delay tactic or we didn't actually expect to win and now what the fuck are we doing kind of tactic?
Oh yeah, I mean, every government does a little bit of this. That's pretty normal. The task force, that's fine. You want to gather information, you want to talk to experts. That's all fine. I think it's important. A lot of these things can be, they can take time, and that won't be a problem. Part of the issue, though, is, okay, how deep are the consultations? How deep are the engagements? The electoral reform, for instance, approach is a mess. It is an unmitigated disaster. There may still be time to save it, although I'm not convinced they're going to be able to or willing to. So that one's a mess. There's a website you can go to. We talked about this before. I think it's called, there's a BC government webpage.
Well, there's engage.gov.bc.
That's the one, yeah. And it's got some sort of hokey democracy title, and these things always do. Like GovU,
Gov Together BC.
Gov Together. That is so much worse than I could have imagined. Gov Together. So it just sounds a little bit filthy, doesn't it? Anyway, it's like get really close with your government. So part of the problem with these things is often they get wildly unrepresentative samples of people engaging, which skews the advice that they get. Some of it tends to be shallow or strategic, which is not necessarily what we want. And then, of course, in a lot of cases, even when the process is good, you don't get necessarily very good uptake. And so what you end up getting is, essentially democracy washing. And it's like, look at this great public consultation we did. We met with these church groups, and we met in every library across the province. And like, oh, what came of it? Oh, some very good ideas. Next question. So that's a problem. And there's precedent for this nationally too. There's a great book by SFU political scientist Genevieve Fuji-Johnson called Democratic Illusion. And she goes through a bunch of case studies and says there's all of these great participatory, deliberative things that we've done across the country throughout the years. They go really well, elites buy in, and then at the end there's no uptake. It produces a good result, but none of that result gets picked up and then implemented. And I'd imagine a lot of cases that's going to happen here. And you can obviously, segment task force might be a little bit different than public consultations. You can control a task force. You can hand pick a task force. You can't really do that with a public consultation. So I'm pretty cynical and skeptical about the value of these things, unless you get something like a full-blown BC Citizens Assembly, which we had in 2005, technically a little earlier, to 2003 to 2004, that was deeply consultative and worked quite well. Unless you put it this way. Unless you build these things into the apparatus of the state as regular, ongoing, deeply resourced sort of programs that then produce outcomes that get taken up, they're mostly sort of semi-meaningful, if not meaningless. So, C-.
So what could they be doing better than, I guess?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there's all kinds of things, and there's a great website called Participedia that you can look up, which is a catalog of democratic innovations and practices around the world, which is great. Run in part by my former supervisor, if we're doing disclosures, but not something I profit from, certainly. You can build these processes into government. So in Oregon, for instance, they have a citizens initiative review panel, and that is an artifact of the Oregonian process of direct democracy, because they can have ballot initiatives. And what this body does is sort of has a look at these ballot initiatives and then deliberates over them and produces a recommendation. We could have citizen panels built into government that are established and ongoing, that are well-resourced, that produce reports or recommendations. And what happens with these groups is they become sort of heuristics or shortcuts that people can look to and say, okay, I don't know a ton about this issue and I don't have time to learn, but here's a little trusted body over here who's thought about it that I can look to and say, okay, well, this is what they think. Maybe that's a place to start. That's what happened in large part with the Citizens' Assembly and electoral reform in 2003, 2004. And, we got 57.7% of people saying yes to electoral reform, I think in large part because of the CA. So that's one way. The other is to hold engagements issue by issue, in which you take a long period of time, you hold regular engagements, you make sure that people have the resources to attend, including those who would be typically marginalized and couldn't attend. You balance participation to make sure it's representative, and then you take seriously what they say and you implement it, or you commit to implementing it. But the problem with all that is it's expensive, it's difficult, it takes a long time, and governments have to give up power. So it's got at least those four things going against it as a rule. I've yet to meet a government that's particularly keen on delegating its authority.
I think one of the challenges the BC NDP has been faced with is they're in such a precarious position that I don't think they're in any sense thinking they have the time to do some of these things right. And they're going, look, we've been out of power for 16 years. We might be out of power in a year. How much can we do? Some of this they have to do fast, like the cannabis consultation. Mm-hmm. The federal government gave them a deadline, and because we didn't have a government all summer, there was no process moving forward on that. So they had to rush that consultation in 2 or 3 weeks. They apparently still got 48,000 responses, but we can get to that later. People have opinions about weed, I guess. But this means they have to do a lot of very quick consultations, like the electoral reform consultation. They wanted to put together this referendum bill because the Greens want this, or else there won't be a government. And so they're stuck almost.
Well, on the structural stuff, I mean, clearly they've picked a few structural issues that they want to tackle because they think, okay, well, this will help us in the long run, no matter what happens. So getting money out of politics is one of those things that sort of levels the playing field. And I think that's reasonable. I think with the electoral reform, it's unfortunate because not only is it democratically, I think, perhaps inappropriate or certainly misguided, it also makes it less likely that they're going to win. So it's both ethically problematic and politically stupid. So it's right in NDP territory. So that's I think going to be a problem for them, and it's really too bad because they could have pushed it. There's really no reason that this has to be held in 2018, other than them saying, well, if we have to redistrict, it's going to take a long time for the Elections BC to do so, which is true. It's complicated, and you're going to have all kinds of public consultations if you do that. It's going to take a long time. But what they could have said was, we're going to kick this down the road, and we're going to do it in a couple of years, and maybe we won't be ready in time for the next election, which you could reasonably do. They still might be able to save this process if they decide to say have a double-barreled referendum. Have the first one. If it passes, have a second one in 2 elections, 10 years, you set whatever threshold you want. And in that way, you get the sort of escape hatch, which is good, and will disempower a lot of the critics who say, well, they're just trying to game the system and stick us with PR, right? So that's an issue too. But on the rest of the consultations, they're trying to get as much done as they possibly can in a limited amount of time. But this is an old problem. Even sort of governments who say they're committed to democracy and participation and deep engagement, as soon as they have a chance to get something done, and if they feel like they need to behave strategically, that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to throw all that stuff out the window, and they're just going to start behaving strategically, and this contributes to a culture of cynicism and distrust. And then, of course, the worst part, if the Liberals win again, when the Liberals win again, you get policy lurch because they're going to come in and just undo as much of the stuff as they possibly can.
Oh, well, they're already running pretty hard against it right now.
Oh, yeah.
The process is rigged is the big thing they're running on right now, and that's always healthy to a democracy when you're saying.
Exactly. Which is dumb because it's just not rigged. Look, I'm a PR supporter. I'm as critical of the NDP as anyone, but the process isn't rigged. They ran on having a vote on proportional representation. Mm-hmm. Now they are preparing for a vote on proportional representation. Like, they said all of this stuff way, way, way back, and now they're just following through on it. And the Liberals might not like that because a PR system is not going to help them, but it's not rigged. And the reason we know that it's not rigged is that there's going to be a democratic vote, public vote that's going to be scrutinized and held, and then the result's going to be what the result.
The Liberals are just upset the rural ridings won't essentially get a veto over the more populous Metro van.
Well, so
Which is how you can structure referendums in different ways. But
yeah. I was a little bit disappointed that there were no regional thresholds, because I don't think any region should have a veto. Not the rural ridings, but also not the metro ridings. I think, in 2005, 2009 votes, 60% threshold to pass. That was ridiculous. That arbitrary and unreasonable. I think a 50% threshold to pass makes a lot of sense. But the NDP vote is problematic for the following reason. If we assume that the following happens, there's no regional threshold, no riding threshold, so it doesn't matter who votes where. 50%, and no turnout threshold. So it does set up a situation where a relatively small number of voters in a few urban centers can pick the process for the rest of the province. And that's a problem. Now you might say, well, democracy is about those who show up. True. And yet the rest of the folks who don't show up have a funny way of deciding for themselves what they're going to be pissed off about, even if they didn't vote. And so they might end up in a situation where people get a little bit pissed, a little bit angry at the way things went. They start to think, well, I don't really trust the system. I do think the NDP gamed it a bit. And you get a backlash. They won't sit down and say, well, I didn't vote, therefore I shouldn't complain. No one in their entire lives has said that, and they never will. So I do think they're setting themselves up for a little bit of trouble. At the very least, there should have been a riding threshold to pass, although 50% plus one, I think, is quite fair nonetheless.
Although they don't want to get into the situation that basically the Vancouver by-election was, where you have 11% turnout and the person who gets the most votes out of that wins.
Yeah.
So if they just lined 5 systems up on the ballot and said most votes wins, because that's how democracy apparently works.
Totally.
That was ridiculous.
This is one of the critiques of First Past the Post, and this is a critique I wrote about a few years ago, was, if turnout continues to decline and we stick with First Past the Post, at some point you're going to have electoral returns where someone is elected with 36 or 37% of 50%, right? It's going to be a very small number of people that are electing this person. And again, you might say, well, look, that's tough. That's how it works. Whoever turns out. Fine. But if parties then don't represent constituencies, if they don't reach out to groups who are quote unquote non-voters, then we're going to get into a real representation problem potentially. And we want to avoid that, because you can complain all you want about, well, it's the fault of citizens for not turning out. But if you don't represent them, or if they feel alienated or apathetic or whatever, then you're going to have a democratic crisis, and it doesn't matter whether or not you want to turn around and blame them for not voting, because the problem is going to be the problem nonetheless. So, I do think it's incumbent on government and elites to set up fair processes, to set up representative processes, and to bust their ass to get people out, because otherwise you're going to have a crisis. And by the way, we're steaming towards one as it is. So this is the last thing we do on top of it.
Well, let's pivot back to what Horgan's been up to besides botching an electoral reform process. Fulfilling promises. He's done a number of them, whether you agree with them or not, like getting rid of the bridge tolls, throwing money at the education system, partially because the courts made the province, and partially because he also wanted to put a bit more in there. Some money's gone to modular housing, and we're starting to see that move forward in Marpole. There's a disabled bus pass, except that's going to happen in January. So a lot of people with disabilities were kind of disappointed to say, why can't we just have that now again? He did raise taxes on corporations and high income earners right away, and then managed to spend most of that money right away. I think even just this week, he announced $33 million to open up 3,800 childcare spaces. And that sort of highlights one of the paused promises, the $10 a day childcare, that it turns out is really expensive, that everyone kind of knew would be expensive. And it's not clear the Greens are really on board with, and that makes everything hard in this situation. And so I guess the hope is opening these childcare spots is a first step. He's also full of cleaning up the mess, let's say, having reviews of ICBC, BC Hydro. There's a new money laundering review finally, and these are all on David Eby's plate, who's also dealing with the electoral reform stuff.
Yeah, I feel for that guy. I mean, I as much as I think the electoral reform thing is a total mess, I don't put that at his feet so much as I do at the feet of those around him.
And then on the things that aren't going as successfully, I saw Andrew Weaver this past week was speaking out against the $400 renter's rebate check, saying this is bad policy. Yeah, that homeowner's grant, we can talk about that maybe, but we just shouldn't be giving money to renters.
The renters rebate is bad policy. Well, there's better ways to spend $400 per person, but yeah, if we're talking that, we should absolutely gut the homeowner's grant, because that's way worse.
There was also the very awkward hydro rate freeze that Horgan announced that then everyone pointed out he didn't actually ask the regulator to consider first, and it was something the NDP actually criticized the Liberals a lot for doing, was just announcing policy without reviews. They're also not getting through their changes on union votes because the Greens don't believe in unions. The Site C dam review is, I think, the next final thing this year that we'll probably get to next week, because that review has been finished for a while and it's kind of been sitting at the cabinet table, and there's now starting to be some leaks of there's some butting heads in those caucus meetings.
Yeah, I think, the smart money, looking at the punditry and looking at things coming out of advocacy groups and watching how, let's say, worked up advocacy groups or anti-Site C groups are getting, that it's going to go ahead. I mean, I think the smart money is on betting that it goes ahead.
I think we both thought it was going to be killed right after the report came out from the BCUC. We were leaning that way.
Yeah, I thought it was, right after the report.
Well, until they said to them, would you mind having another look?
Yeah.
Yeah, right after the report, it definitely slightly in that way, but it was still a bit of a toss-up, and as time's gone on since then, it feels like it's moved more and more into the toss-up category.
And then the other things that haven't really moved very far are housing generally, or any solution to that.
And that's something I've been hearing a lot of kind of grumblings about the NDP, and that's, I think, if anything, they're the most vulnerable and where there's a lot of disappointment in them so far.
It does turn out that housing is a very complicated and difficult file that you can't just wave magic wands at. But they had promises and specific things they said they'd do, but just don't feel like doing, which is weird.
I mean, there's only so much political capital in the bank as well, and only so much you can sort of process at one time. And they might be letting this one go as a slow burner as they try to figure it out and then move on it, and then, in the years to come. I mean, on balance, I think they've done pretty well. But, I mean, the problem for them is, they're going to get judged on specific things, not on their performance as a whole. I mean, or rather, they're going to get judged in a way that weights certain things more than others. So, MSP, people might like that. Pot, people might like that. They might like, the disability raises are great. But they're not going to win or lose an election on that. They're going to win or lose an election on how well the economy is performing, how affordable the province is in light of things like housing. Of course, things like daycare and disability funding plays into that. But, there are bigger economic movements going on. And they're going to, and to some extent, they have a lot of potential exposure on Kinder Morgan and Site C, because there are people who support them typically who care a lot about those things and who are going to vote based on those things. And if they lose on Kinder Morgan and they decide to go ahead with Site C, they risk one of two things happening. A voter stays home because they say, I can't support these bozos. They do nothing on the things I care about. Or they go to the Greens. And either way, they're in trouble. So it's why it's sort of like the wisdom of passing Site C is lost. I mean, I don't see politically why you would do that, other than, you're worried about a short-term rate hike. But of course, either way, you're going to get it. So they're in a tough spot. So I don't put it this way. To some extent, it doesn't matter how well they perform. They're going to just run into these structural issues where it's a catch-22. And once the sort of demographics of the province catch up with them, 2020, 2021, whenever the next election is going to be, assuming that it goes 4 years, is going to be a tough contest for them. Of course, if they get PR, it's a different issue.
Yeah. Well, and the Greens have been an interesting force this sitting so far, continually called the coalition partner, which they're not, and they're very explicitly an opposition who votes with the government when those bills come up. There's been 9 private members' bills put forward. None have moved past first reading, but 8 of those bills have come from the Green Party. Andrew Weaver himself has put forward 7 of them. The not Green Party private member's bill came from Liberal Linda Larson, and its goal was to kill daylight savings time. And it was just tabled the other day.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which was something Horgan had talked about. People had been emailing him about, and he was like, oh, if I have no opinion at all on this. If you want it, email me. And then he got a bunch of emails of people who were like, daylight savings time is the dumbest thing ever. Let's get rid of it.
Daylight savings time is the dumbest thing ever, and we should get rid of it.
You know what? I'm with Horgan. I have no idea. I really don't. Look, I mean, I work from dark to dark either way, so it doesn't matter to me. But I'd imagine, what's the argument for getting rid of it? That it's built for farming? Is that the thing?
It wasn't really, but...
Basically, it saves no electricity on that, and there's a bunch of negative effects of changing people's schedules twice a year.
Accidents go up. And
accidents go up. Heart attacks go up. There's just a
Really?
whole bunch of complications surrounding the negative effects of even just changing an hour.
There's a Saskatchewan doesn't observe. Is it Saskatchewan?
Yeah.
That doesn't
Saskatchewan
observe it?
doesn't observe it. Arizona doesn't, I think it is. And Hawaii don't as well.
Interesting.
Hawaii can do its own thing, though. It's an island, right?
It's also south of the Tropic of Cancer, so like, why bother at that point?
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of these things that I wish we could just harmonize with everyone else. So we can't even get Family Day worked out, so I don't love our chances with this. Yeah. There's an issue. Family Day. Why isn't Family Day harmonized?
Because of Big Ski Hill. No, it actually is. We've talked about this in past episodes, but there are lobby industries that represent ski hills, and they want basically 2 long weekends, like the Alberta long weekend and the Alberta and Washington long weekend, which is the same, and then the BC long weekend. And then their argument is this way the hotels are never full, and so everyone can come skiing.
It's big slope.
Yeah, which is the thing.
Big slope. I gotcha.
But coming back to the Greens, Andrew Weaver's been doing pretty well for himself, despite the ever-present risk of foot and mouth disease that he seems to have and general anger that can erupt. Horgan as well hasn't been that angry. He's just been like a kid in a candy shop. Did you see the photo of him lighting the Christmas tree? He was,
that was
like
lovely.
The happiest person in the province.
That was one of my favorite photos of this year because he was just like genuinely very pleased to be there. And I think in some sense, he likes the job and he's happy to be there. I mean, I just like him. I don't usually like politicians. I find that as a default, my affect towards politicians is either neutral or negative. But he's just a sort of a guy who is tough to like. He also went to university in my hometown, Peterborough, Ontario. So I mean, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but he plainly likes it. So if you look at someone like Trump, that guy clearly does not like his job. Horgan clearly does, which is nice, and that goes a long way. You know, maybe we'll see 2 years from now that he doesn't love it so much, but at the moment he does. And it can't be easy having to manage a precarious legislative situation. And Andrew Weaver, who's, can be a little bit mercurial, although I think has had a pretty decent session himself.
And then the Liberals have been mired in their leadership race and sniping intermittently at the NDP and at Daryl Plecas. And the number of continual partisan barbs they throw at him, it's like at some point they have to get over it, I think, but they don't seem to think so.
No,
they still seem to be in the angry at stage of the relationship.
Yeah, that's right. They're still they've been wronged, and he'll never do better than us, and yeah, that's where they are. It's petty and classless, and it's not going to do them any favors. And I think if it registers for anyone, it registers as negative, and for most people, it's just inside baseball, and they don't care. So it makes no sense to me. Maybe it's a steam valve, but it'll be nice to see them have a permanent leader. Rather than a temporary leader who's just completely feckless, who will hopefully, start to organize these folks a little bit and get them in line. Because
the only barb I think they've managed to land on the NDP has been on the electoral reform stuff, just because it's more self-inflicted than, strength of argument. They can yell rigged as much as they want, but when you have a consultation process that is seen justly or not, as you say, unfair or sloppy or overly quick, you open yourself up to those jabs. And if the Liberals aren't taking them, Keith Baldry and the media commentary class definitely are.
Absolutely. I mean, and that could have been avoided. I clearly I have very strong feelings about electoral reform, but If you'd had a citizens' assembly and a referendum, then you could have avoided all of this. You wouldn't have been able to scream rigged. You would have completely taken the issue out of the hands of politicians, put it into the hands of the people, which would have been appropriate. But, instead you have to deal with this. And I mean, again, most British Columbians don't care about electoral reform. Most British Columbians have no idea what it is. But they do pick up on things like rigged, which is a problem.
Well, let's do some quick predictions for the BC NDP in 2018.
Ooh.
Setting aside Site C, which will be next week, and we'll figure it out then. They have the budget coming up in the spring. They've already done the tax hikes that they've promised or set out that they would do, which means they don't have a ton of change to play with, but they have lots of unfulfilled promises. What do we expect might happen in the spring? Are they going to add more corporate tax hikes or other loophole closes? Are they going to just go into deficit saying, screw it, we can do what we want, the Liberals got away with, or the federal Liberals got away with it?
I don't think they'll run deficits if they can help it. I think the fact of politics in Canada is you can get away with running deficits if you're a conservative or a liberal, but it's a lot harder to do it, if you're the NDP, because of sort of prejudice towards the parties. I mean, I think part of what pushed Thomas Mulcair to opposing deficits and allowed Justin Trudeau to take that space up quite wisely in 2015 was Justin Trudeau has Jean Chrétien and most notably Paul Martin coming out in support of that approach. And people sort of said, well, they did okay in the 90s and they righted the books when the IMF was knocking at the door, so we trust them, and so go for it, But with the NDP, no, they'll crash the car into the ditch. And that's, that's too bad, because it was probably to some extent, the right policy move. At least certainly the NDP folks thought it was the right policy move. They tried to rescue themselves by saying, well, we can't pay for programs if we have structural deficits, which is true, but it wasn't necessarily going to be structural deficits. But if you're the provincial NDP, I think the idea of running structural deficits to pay for programs is a problem. So I think they'll avoid it as much as they can and just start to sort of hedge on their promises a little bit. And that's just, I think you're more likely going to see closed loopholes and perhaps sort of nudging tax rates up here or there rather than running deficits.
And whatever the MSP task force suggests to pay for that hole in the budget.
Well, that's the big one. And I think, it's just mind-boggling to me that people think that, we're not going to have to pay MSP anymore. Like, where do you think that money is going to come from? I mean, it was effectively a hidden, not a hidden tax, it was a shell game, tax. Right? It was an explicit tax. And the argument was, well, it's not hidden. And what did Christy Clark say a couple of years ago? It reminds people that healthcare isn't free, which is one of the silliest arguments in favor I've ever heard. But it allowed them to say, well, look how low these other tax rates are. Never mind, we're not going to talk about MSP.
Yeah, but it hasn't helped that the NDP's branded their repeal of it as making life more affordable when you're getting taxed the same rate at the end anyway. It's just how it's being done.
Unless it comes off as a less flat tax, which it basically wasn't even a flat tax. It was just a flat fee.
That's the way. No, that's
of everyone above 20 grand.
That's the sense in which it's smarter. And obviously it's smarter not to have MSP because it's less, you can build a tax system or build a way of getting that money that's less regressive, which is what you want, I think, in a modern tax code. So you don't want it to be regressive, and you don't want to create this separate apparatus, which is a whole different bureaucracy that's cumbersome and expensive to run, right? So you run it through the general revenue like everybody else. And then you have to be honest about what your tax rates are. But there is going to be money they have to make up if they get rid of it. They're going to have to find it in another place. And I think they have a good sense of how they're going to do that already. But obviously they've wisely called in some experts, including Lindsay Tents, who I certainly would want on my team. So they'll also perhaps give them a little bit of political cover, not too much. Experts don't give you too much political cover, but they give you a little bit, and I think they'll work that out. So yeah, they're going to have to find a way to pay for that and to raise a little bit of money to do it. They have less room than they think, and they certainly can't afford all of their promises. So we're going to see something cut.
Yeah, as far as my predictions, I agree. We're not going to see a structural deficit. Bet something big on housing will be announced probably around the budget, and it'll leave a lot of people disappointed. And the George Massey Tunnel will probably be announced. It's going to be a bridge.
Yeah.
but smaller in scale than the one that was
Then
previously
the
proposed.
10 plus 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Crazy
thinking 6 to 8 lanes, maybe a dedicated rapid transit lane on there.
Ooh, that would be nice.
Well, that was already in the Clark version.
Oh, I didn't know
Well,
that.
to add space to
There was-
allow. There was future expansion
Right.
capacity
Oh,
built into it.
They had enough lanes, they could do everything they wanted.
Yeah, right. There could be a lane for tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, and I guess the other thing we'll just have to watch out for in the new year is spark points for the NDP Green Alliance. I think Site C and Kinder Morgan are going to be the most obvious ones, as Andrew Weaver hasn't said, or he said explicitly he won't bring the government down over those, but if those things go ahead, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him internally to hold the government far more accountable.
I could also see electoral reform being a potential sticking point if the Greens don't feel the NDP are really as vociferously coming out in support of it as they think is warranted.
Well, and one thing that bit the Liberal Democrats in the UK was breaking a couple promises, and then the electoral reform referendum they faced was almost a referendum on them. And if the Greens are seen to have cost anything in BC, like if Site C goes through and Kinder Morgan wins, and then the Greens have lost their why people voted for them, then the electoral reform referendum to some extent becomes, well, why are you even here, Andrew Weaver? Which could be bad for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be disappointed on Site C and Kinder Morgan, so I think they're going to be in a tough spot. People are going to start to say, well, like you said, what's the value here of having you around? I get the sense that Andrew Weaver is putting all his eggs in the electoral reform basket. Now that he's got money out of politics and official party status, that actually makes strategic sense, because what you do is you say, well, look, we might lose on issue 1, 2, or 3 today, but we're looking down the road at the next 50, 60, 100 issues, and the best way to have influence on those is to have more seats in Parliament that's proportional to how many votes we get, and to maintain official party status, and the best way to do that is proportional representation. Because he's got to know in his heart of hearts that he turns back into a pumpkin at midnight. And that's the next election, absent PR.
Pumpkins are orange.
They are orange, much like pumpkin beer, which I
was just thinking like the NDP, but you
I
can
go to
a
pumpkin
different way.
beer. There's still a little bit of pumpkin beer left out, by the way, in the stores. I've been like sort of going around store to store drinking it all because I'm as people like to say, I'm basic is what I guess. I don't entirely know what that means, but that's what everyone keeps telling me, because I like pumpkin spice lattes and pumpkin beer. So there you go. It's a little bit about me.
So moving on to Twit-Tates, the federal government has finally pulled the plug on the plan to buy the interim Super Hornets from Boeing, which was a dumb plan, and they are now moving ahead with an even dumber one of buying used Australian fighter jets. So, will they figure out that they're probably actually really going to end up buying the F-35, because it's basically the only option that really meets the needs for the next 30 years.
Maybe they're waiting on a new fighter. They're just trying to bide their time until the successor to the F-35 comes out.
Also bad idea, but...
Yeah.
So that's getting cancelled in favor of buying planes that are just as old and in nearly as bad shape as the planes that we currently are flying. But it looks like we're going to be buying the Aussies' old F-18s to replace our old F-18s. And this is, as I haven't been exactly subtle about, not a great idea, because, well, fighter jets, they have a service life, and you can only pull so many high G turns, fly them so many times before metal fatigue sets in and the airframe falls apart. And, well, this doesn't really seem to address it. Some stories coming out of Australia about how, the fighter jets there are in bad shape. So overall, this is starting to shape up like another submarines fiasco.
One of those reports used the phrase, these fighters have a, quote, brief history of fatigue cracking, which is a reassuring thing when you're flying at faster than the speed of sound. You know what? Credit to Australia, because my favorite part of this story is how the day after Boeing filed the lawsuit against Bombardier in their trade spat, Australia was on the phone with Canada being like, so you're in the market for fighter jets, we hear. And Canada's like, oh, yes. And we can't buy the good ones, so...
I mean, is it a stopgap measure to maintain capacity? Is that the idea?
Yeah, it's basically to keep fighters in the air in the meantime. So we maintain capacity. It's also a lot more expensive to recover capacity that you or capabilities that you lose rather than maintain them.
Right. But could we maintain them with the current fleet?
Well, once again, we're running into problems of aging airframes, and the idea is we want to retire some of ours before or reduce the amount of service they're seeing.
So we're upgrading from the 92 Sunfire to the 94 Cavalier. Is that what's going
actually, yeah.
No, we're just buying another 92 Sunfire.
Yeah,
with fewer miles on it?
Yeah, last
No,
time we
that someone
talked.
else doesn't want.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, they us in Australia bought our fighters within a year of each other.
Oh,
The best similar story I have to compare is when I was in elementary or middle school, I think middle school, something like that. I had to take the bus to school all the time in southern Alberta. And one year, for whatever reason, we got quote unquote new school buses, but they were used ones from the Maritimes that they had deemed to exhausted their life. And school buses in the Maritimes collect a lot of salt water and other rust. And so southern Alberta was getting these rusty, abandoned buses from the Maritimes because I guess they were on fire sale and we had Ralph Klein, so we needed every dollar saved in the education budget. I made it to school every day on time.
Well, see, there you go.
Or at least most.
Yeah, so
But you know, the idea of bringing in the rejects just because you're trying to save a buck. Now, we could take the entire other option of just like defunding the military entirely, or at least having a discussion there, but this sort of starve the beast almost approach to the military is just dishonest and ineffective for everyone.
Yeah, and also puts the pilots at risk who will be flying these.
Right.
And it was going to be expensive if we bought the Super Hornets because that's basically a whole new air fleet. It's a lot of extra redundant costs to run basically two separate types of planes. But the solution to that isn't buy bad planes, it's speed up the glacially slow procurement process that was sort of underway before the current government canned it when they came into power, only to kind of restart it, but with several years delay. And now we're frantically searching for a stopgap.
Well, you're mentioning problematic procurement elements. I think you have a story to tell us about boats.
Yes. So another major government procurement disaster has been replacing our Navy because they're also old and starting to rust. And part of a national shipbuilding strategy is we're going to be spending about $30 billion on new ships. However, that's ballooning up to around 62 was the last estimate. And there was just an RFP that closed on it. But right before it did, there was a French and Italian consortium who came in with a low bid on it, kind of coming in just out of the blue, not really having participated in some of the earlier stuff on it. But it looks like they're coming in roughly at half the price of the built in Canada option that Lockheed and BAE's proposing.
Yeah, the French and Italians, I guess, just found an extra 15 frigates laying around or realized they could build them on the cheap and went, hey, we want to make a deal. But my favorite part of this is how Canada's public procurement department replied going, we don't accept proposals outside the established process because it would undermine the, quote, fair and competitive nature of this procurement. And they don't want to break faith with the bidders who put the time and effort into the competitive process. You know, you don't want to undermine the reputation of the Royal Canadian Navy's procurement process.
What?
You know, that's literally their excuse and their argument. They're saying...
And there's the unspoken problem of the first bunch of these wouldn't be built in Canada, which is the political problem here because we treat given the military the equipment it needs as a jobs program first, and a actually having the equipment we need to do what we ask the service members to do as a distant third or fourth priority.
Right. That makes sense.
So we're not getting the cheap boats.
No.
And now there's 2 or 3 bids that actually got in under the wire. And I think Lockheed Martin was one of them. And there was another British one, I think. But yeah, Canada's procurement. We want to make sure it's fair. Because that's what capitalism's about.
Absolutely. That's right. Fairness, which is to say economic nationalism.
Well, other awkward news for the federal Liberals. MP Kent Hare is in hot water this week after he dismissed thalidomide survivors in apparently mid-October. He was having a meeting with the Thalidomide Survivors Task Group in which he said things like, well, you don't have it as bad today as adults as you did when you were kids. And everyone in Canada has a sob story. And the survivors also said, and he disputes this part, he acknowledges the previous parts. So you probably have about 10 years left then now. That's good news for the Canadian government. He later apologized, saying he tends to be very straightforward, but he understands that his comments can be brash and sometimes even inappropriate. And so he's regretting his comments and hoping to take steps to better himself. The most interesting part of this story for me, though, is not just that Kent Hare shot his mouth off, but that a different group called the Thalidomide Victims Association of Canada, which I think is actually the longer lasting one and the one that was around in 2015 for the settlement they negotiated then. And I don't think we'll get into the thalidomide settlement because none of us know that history that well. But they distanced themselves from the survivors task group, saying these survivors are not members of the original survivors task force and did not participate in the work that went into that settlement, which is an interesting statement to have to put out. So you have this like breakaway group that was meeting with an MP who then shot his mouth off, and then they're like all over the media now saying, hey, we got yelled at by an MP who himself has a disability. So it's just a weird story.
I don't quite know what to make of it, to be honest. I don't think we'll ever really know. I mean, it just obviously certainly some of the comments were inappropriate. I mean, certainly the ones he acknowledged were inappropriate. So that's a problem. You know, he should have apologized. He did apologize. You know, he has to keep working with these folks. That's one of the concerns, is can you keep the relationship going, and do other groups look at you and start to say, well, I don't know what's going on there. That said, it seems to be an isolated incident. No other groups have sort of said we've had similar problems, so you know, maybe this won't be an issue for him going forward, but unless someone has said something.
Yeah, there was actually a story that came out today of a Calgary mom who met with Kent Hare back when he was Minister of Veterans Affairs on behalf of a group of mothers who were denied benefits while on maternity leave. So, you know, like one of the most sympathetic groups you can deal with, she accused him of being very condescending. And it's reported she pointedly asked him why Ottawa continues to fight sick women, which he responded with, that's a loaded question. When did you stop beating your wife?
What?
Yes. Which is like the kind of typical "this is what a loaded question is" example, but like it's comes across as a little cold and
not particular. It's not what we call practical wisdom. You know, it's not knowing when to say the right thing. Wow.
Yeah, I grew up just outside Calgary, and I know a lot of people who know Kent Hare personally and like him. I've never heard a bad thing about him, so this has just been a weird week of.
This is
one of these stories even mentioned, I forget if it was that mom one or one of the thalidomide people, but they said he went to like grab something and like brush their arm near a breast or something and was like almost trying to imply a sexual harassment.
The thalidomide one.
But
that one seemed to be a little more
apologized.
reaching,
He apologized on that, saying, I didn't intend to do anything. I'm sorry if there was contact, but it's all very weird. And I can't tell if some of it's trying to play off the Me Too and scandals. And
I don't know. He'll certainly be on notice for the foreseeable future. the next shuffle, we'll see if anything came of it. But
I think given Bill Morneau still has his job, this is not as hot of water for Kent Hare.
Yeah,
but
true. He might get away with it just because he's not the public enemy number one, while Bill Morneau is still around screwing things up. By the way, in terms of communications, Bill Morneau remains a pretty competent, honest guy. Just he has a real political comms problem.
Yeah, this probably isn't fatal to him, but nevertheless, the people in the PMO who are looking around at the Nets cabinet shuffle where Morneau's probably going to be going around probably started paying a little more attention to Kent Hare this week than he wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine if you're a minister, the ideal situation is no one pays any attention to you. This was if you read people who talk about working with Chrétien, it was sort of like the goal was to just try not to ever hear from him. It was like with Chrétien talked about this with Trudeau. He said, when he was a cabinet minister and a peer of Trudeau got in touch with him one time and said, Jean, are you mad at me? Well, you haven't talked to you in a year or a year and a half. And he's like, nope, just doing my job, trying to stay off the radar. And I think if you're a cabinet minister, that's what you want to do. Just sort of don't make the news and you're doing okay. Which is not, Morneau, Kent Hare, Mélanie Joly, Miriam Wansef, there are these stories of when cabinet ministers do make the news.
it's kind of inevitable with a new government. Although they've been in for 2 years.
They've been in for 2 years. And like the cabinet has done fairly well. From day one, they were a pretty competent, impressive bunch, and they've remained so as well. But remember we had problems with Harjit Sajjan, and that went away. We don't talk about that anymore. Everyone's forgotten it. He's back under the radar. The justice minister is under the radar. They're doing okay.
Well, moving on to BC news, the BC government's announced what it's going to do about cannabis legalization, and it's going to be both public and private sales, but the liquor distribution branch is going to handle all the wholesale work on this, as well. The minimum age is going to be 19.
These are fairly straightforward and almost obvious ways forward. I would have been surprised if it wasn't this. Actually, looking at how we do liquor in this province, there's a lot still unknown about this. We don't know pricing, said CBC, but we also don't know the specifics of will they be sold in liquor stores versus a new line of stores, and that's not clear. I know there's some research suggesting selling cannabis in liquor stores is not a good idea, just because it promotes mixing your vices, I guess. But everyone seems pretty happy except people like Dana Larson who just want to grow their pot and sell it on the street. I know there was a crackdown this past week on the vendors who just set up around on Robson Square and just are basically selling cannabis in the street, because this is Vancouver and that's what happens now. But yeah, lots of open question marks. The government hasn't budgeted any revenue for next year off of sales, but they're saying there's going to be a bunch of upfront costs, which suggests opening more staff in the liquor distribution branch, possibly opening new stores. That money's going to have to come from somewhere, so...
Yeah, it seems fine. 15, 16-year-olds are going to continue to get pot in the back alley. That was going to happen.
And face criminal charges for it.
Which is a whole different...
But that's
awful mess.
That's not BC's fault.
But that's not BC's fault. And the public-private mix is key. Ontario didn't go that way, which is really unfortunate. If one of the arguments is we want to try to crack down on crime, this is one of the federal arguments for doing it in the first place. Get it out of the hands of mobsters and into government coffers. That model is not great because, government-only stores are going to be inadequate, I think. So you're going to see, I think BC is going to play it a lot better in BC than in Ontario, for instance. And
you have the Liquor Control Board essentially monitoring quality and safety. And
that's reasonable.
Standards.
Well, you want some regulation there.
Yeah. The growing science and studies around cannabis are fascinating. They're finding that the THC levels between things you can get at your dispensary around here now, which are fairly unregulated despite being illegal, or I guess because it's illegal, varies widely. Like some of them seem like a moderate amount, others are 10 times as much. I don't know. So having some standards across the province seems like it should be a good thing.
Yeah, I think they're not going to get too much pushback on this. I think it'll go perfectly fine, which is nice.
Yeah, it's really not much to complain about here. And yeah, the only concern I had was whether or not there was going to be only public sales. And
they actually managed to make the unions happy because the BCGEU wanted it all public sales, but they'll probably settle for this. I think the BC Liberals don't really have many talking points. They just want to make sure that these stores aren't near sensitive areas.
Yeah.
And keep the crime down.
They're not going to pop up in school gymnasiums, I guess.
No, I guess not. In the cafeteria. The only people who are unhappy are the potheads.
They'll mellow out soon enough.
Yeah. Well, moving over to the municipal level, the Mayor's Council here in Metro Vancouver had its vote for who would be chair of the council. Gregor Robertson had been chair for the past few years, Mayor of Vancouver, but just today, Derek Horgan, Mayor of Burnaby, won the seat.
Yeah, and this has made a lot of people not very happy. So Patrick Johnson, the city councillor from New Westminster's reaction was, "Holy Christ." TransLink finally has a provincial government ready to work with them, and the mayor's put the most transit regressive mayor in charge, which, is more or less a fair characterization, because he's opposed the Evergreen line, the Canada line. Basically, if it isn't in his municipality, it's not worth doing. And he's already making noises about maybe the current 10-year plan that has both the Broadway subway line, which should have been built 15 years ago, and Surrey's LRT has been maybe just a little too ambitious for TransLink.
Corrigan's weird because he is the NDP mayor of Burnaby and has been there for a while and is pretty popular. In 2009, Maclean's declared Burnaby the most well-run city in Canada, with I think Vancouver and Surrey coming in 3 and 4. Saskatoon, second best.
Go figure.
Well-run city. But Burnaby has this decent reputation under Corrigan, except when it comes to transit issues or
Development's the other one.
Is becoming more controversial, but...
Yeah, with how they've gone about concentrating all of the new development in the existing apartment areas rather than the massive single-family homes near SkyTrain stations.
And their plan to rip down Metrotown. Corrigan's got this weird, I think, growing left-wing backlash and pushback, but it's hard to tell because he's clearly the establishment. He's planning to run again, as far as I know, next year. And now he's doing this, does everyone really need transit right now? kind of talk. And that's actually, I think, what he told Justin McElroy at CBC about this plan. So a lot of people are on edge. The Mayor's Council also has influence into TransLink. So
in fact, they basically appoint most of the people on the Board of Governors.
I mean, he's just the chair, though.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
and
it's still not a great sign when that's the way things are going. Yeah, when Justin McElroy, former guest on this show, asked him about what this means for the projects that are kind of planned and underway, they're looking at a very ambitious plan, and I think they're trying to proceed very quickly to accomplish everything in the plan. I think there will be a slowdown. So basically, he's hinting that it's not going to be going ahead nearly as fast as people wanted it. One of the other things that came out of the meeting, besides kicking Gregor Robertson out of the chair position, was they voted on a proposal to generate a bunch of money for transit expansion, and specifically as a tax on new construction. They want to generate $20 million a year, so they're basically going to be charging anywhere from $2,100 per new single-family house to 50 cents per square foot of industrial space that gets built.
It's almost inevitable that TransLink needed to come up with some kind of new funding after the provincial government forced them to do the stupidest referendum in the province's history. I'll go on record
also fought for the no side of. So, yeah, one of my least favorite mayors in the area. Of course, there's the obvious congestion charge thing, which they're looking at, and I thankfully haven't heard anything negative out of him yet on that one, but I'm sure he probably has something dumb to say about it. So yeah, in the meantime, they're looking at this proposal, and I mean, they need money somehow, but why this? Like, should we really be making new housing more expensive? And also, why is a single, like how they break it down? So a single family home's $2,100, but an apartment's $1,200. So like a cul-de-sac, like build a subdivision of like low density, hard to service with transit, and you're paying less money to them than one apartment building would pay.
But it's a per person almost fee. So
Yeah,
a
but
person who owns a home is less likely to use transit, so they're dinging them a little bit more. And so it makes sense on that factor to me, unless you
but in terms
are
of
arguing that they should be charging the apartment building like 10 grand, and then they should charge it by
in terms
acreage.
In terms of how it's done, the cost to service these various ones is nowhere near proportional to how they are charging it.
Running quickly through a couple housekeeping stories just to keep up to date. The controversial modular homes that have been temporary modular homes that are planned for the Marpole area in South Vancouver look like they're going ahead now, as the city has won a court injunction against the protesters, basically telling them you have to protest on the other side of the street and let the construction crews enter. That's gone ahead, so good news there.
Good news, yeah.
The other thing that's been really encouraging is how well the students at the school there have been really changing the discussion. I know it was feeling hyper polarized and partisan, and then a bunch of kids came in and went, no, we think it's a good idea. And then everyone went, oh, now it calmed down a bit. I mean, you still have the like cranky old people who don't want it, but when you have them saying, but think of the children, and the children are like, we want it.
It was great.
It's hard to beat that.
It was great. I mean, it's a great story. It's a plucky young group of students standing up for those less fortunate, while their parents go and do their NIMBY bit on the side of the road like a bunch of bozos. It was nice to see, and I have a lot of faith in everyone's saying, it gives me a lot of faith in the future of humanity. It gives me a lot of faith in the future of those humans.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to conclude too much.
Realistically, it's probably about a dozen students out of a school of 1,000 people.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. They're remarkable folks, and it's been nice to have them out there stumping for those who have a hard time stumping for themselves, given their sort of marginalized position in society. It'll get done. Everyone will adjust. It'll be fine. We won't be talking about this in a couple of months. But in the meantime, though,
we'll be
does
talking
anyone
about...
talk about the one at Terminal?
No,
Exactly.
I've never heard it. I've never heard anything.
Yeah.
And they're going to be building dozens and dozens more of these.
They also announced the net site for this, which was at Hounslow Street near 29th Avenue Station.
Just running quickly through who's announced that they're in the race for re-election in just under a year in the city of Vancouver. Mike Howell for the Vancouver Courier did the legwork, so shout out to him for calling up everyone who's a sitting councillor and putting it to them. Gregor Robertson's in, Raymond Louis, Heather Deal, all from Vision, have all said they're in. Hector Bremner, who was just elected, is saying he's likely running.
98%. Or
Okay.
actually, probably 99%
Yeah.
he's going to be running.
Melissa Genovo, another MPA councillor, has also said she's in. Adrian Carr said she's definitely in from the Greens. Jean Swanson and Judy Graves have both said they're considering it very strongly. Not running for sure is Andrea Reimer from Vision and George Affleck from NPA. I think we mentioned that one earlier. And the people who are sort of keeping mum, Tim Stevenson from Vision has said it's too early to be talking about that, isn't it? We should be focused on doing policy and stuff.
That sounds like a no.
And then Kerry Jenks said similarly he's not going to answer. And Elizabeth Ball from the NPA has not answered Mike Howell's phone calls.
Well, that's too bad.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see who else there's their hat in the ring who's not on council then. And at some point, we'll have to do a roundup of the mayors who are rerunning. I know some local
Justin
journalists.
Adler has already gone through.
Of
And
course he has. He's the best. He's gonna do brackets. Gonna have brackets of the dream mayor of Metro Vancouver.
that's how the mayor's council should have selected.
That is how they should have done it. Oh, they
Why
missed a
was that
chance.
not an option on the proportional representation
You know,
thing?
that's
We
a
should
good-
have brackets.
We absolutely should have brackets. Well, I guess we kind of do if you have a ranked ballot. You kind of have brackets in a sense. But I would have liked to see like an old school playoff showdown bracket. That's a good idea.
Like spread it over an entire month to keep the excitement up.
Yeah, we could have like October Madness.
Well, France does the runoff election, but that's just not as good.
Yeah, and it takes too long. 2 weeks. What is it between rounds or something
Yeah.
like that? That's too long. No.
And finally, we're going to end on what's probably one of the dumbest stories of the week, and definitely the dumbest story in
It's
Canadian.
one of the dumbest stories of the year.
And yeah, potentially a new low point for Canadian federalism,
Which is saying something.
as Saskatchewans decided to get a little petty on their public works projects and ban any truck with an Alberta license plate from being on their job sites.
New job sites only. So construction projects that are underway, they will still let Alberta plates on. But if a new one starts up, the contractors will have to make sure every vehicle there has a Saskatchewan plate. So for whatever reason, this states, in Saskatchewan's terms, and I'm not going to really defend Saskatchewan because I'm from Alberta, so I'm clearly partisan on this issue, but Saskatchewan says that their contractors on Alberta sites, they felt forced to register their vehicles in Alberta, which is coded language for saying literally nothing. Like someone felt like someone mentioned, oh, your insurance would probably be easier if your business trucks were actually Alberta registered. Alberta's economic development minister, Darren Bill denied that this is a requirement. And then they've threatened to sue Saskatchewan over this new policy. And Bilu says, Bradwell is absolutely desperate. We know our economy is growing by 4%. Their economy is in the dumps. So he's grasping at straws, just basically picking a fight with Bradwell because the NDP and Saskatchewan Party have nothing really in common at this point. And it's easy for them both to score points by going after their ideological opponent. Meanwhile, people driving their trucks now have to switch their plates in Saskatchewan.
I mean, we have other things that we should be working on, right, as a country? Like climate change?
I imagine there's, well, even in Saskatchewan, they probably have potholes they need to fix, and now that just got a little harder.
I know for a fact they have potholes they need to fix. Ditto Alberta. I mean, come on, guys, get back to work for God's sakes.
And this is less than a year since the provinces all signed that Canadian Free Trade Agreement, which the fact that we had to do that alone was bad enough. But
I thought that's what the Constitution was.
It's and interesting. And this is all happening while the Supreme Court's hearing arguments in the Comeau case, which is the
Right.
Free the Beer case.
Yes, from New Brunswick, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's I'm watching that one closely.
The fun thing I noticed is every province's attorney general is there, except for Manitoba's. And the only reason I can think Manitoba isn't there is because Brian Pallister was probably in the Caribbean and just forgot.
It's possible.
Or he broke his arm while he was in the Caribbean. Did you hear that story? And so he can't actually sign bills now.
I did hear that.
And so he's having his
Can't
deputy.
just do it lefty.
Apparently he doesn't want to.
Oh God, what a country! I mean, in some sense, it's nice that these
Actually,
are the
wait.
problems we have, but
Isn't the lieutenant governor's arm just fine though?
New thing's weird in
it was
Manitoba.
executive orders.
Yeah. It was his government orders. Yeah. Sorry, not bills.
Either way, I mean, and yet the governments have not fallen. It's nice though. I mean, I wrote a piece for Maclean's a while ago called, "We're a nation of frenemies." This was about the Alberta and BC spat over Kinder Morgan. It's like, this is what we do. It's just we beat on each other for all kinds of stupid reasons. It's, it reminds me of me and my brother growing up. Like, Mom, David pushed me down the stairs. It's like, it's basically the same thing. Saskatchewan's got their license plates on her sites. I mean, get over yourselves, for God's sakes. There's serious people trying to do serious work here. Don't be a bunch of children. But it's a nice light story to end what was otherwise an awfully horrid week.
All right. Well, thanks again for being on the show, David. Maybe you can just, before we close out, tell people where they can find you and when they can pre-order your book.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you can find me at www on the internet computers, www.davidmoscrop.com, and on Twitter at David_Moscrop, MOSCROP. And my book will be released in the spring of 2019. I have passed the halfway mark, 40,000 words today. So about 30,000 to go, and then all of your political problems will be solved. Not all your political problems will be solved.
And that has been Politos. Find links to the stories you mentioned in the show notes at politos.ca. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at PolitosPod. Leave us a review and let us know what you think. Support the show and get early access to our interviews at patreon.com/Politos. And if you have ideas for the show, feel free to send them to us. Thanks for listening.